Hello, welcome to part 4 of How to Study History. We're going to we're going to cover precedent, which is what went first. It's very, very simple to find if you know how to look. So I'm going to show you how to look. And we're not supposed to base our constitutional issues based on what a court says. We're supposed to base our precedent, what went before, what proceeded now, back to the colonization and the original Constitution itself. Remember, elected officials or appointed officials all swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And it's not the Constitution as we see it, it's the Constitution as understood in the language of the people that wrote it. And we have gotten so far away from that, but that is a different topic for a different day. So we are going to share screen and we're going to go through it here. And this might take a little while, but be patient. I think you'll be very surprised when we get to the end. We're going to use Article 3, Section 18 of the Mississippi Constitution and its Freedom of Religion Clause. And it says, no religious test as a qualification for office shall be required, and no preference shall be given by any law to any religious sect or mode of worship, but the free enjoyment of all religious sentiments and the different modes of worship shall be held sacred. The rights hereby secured shall not be construed to justify acts of licentiousness, injurious to morals, or dangerous to the peace and safety of the state, or to exclude the Holy Bible from use in any public school in this state. So, like I said before, this clause right here, the Holy Bible cannot be excluded from use in any public school in this state. And this is in the Bill of Rights under freedom of religion. How could this possibly be constitutional with what we're taught today? And yet here it is in the current Constitution of the state of Mississippi that all of our officials swear to uphold and defend. And remember, a constitution, a state constitution, has to be ratified by the federal government and signed off on by the president to make sure that it doesn't contradict anything in the federal constitution before it can be implemented in the state. So, and we're going to see how all that unfolds here. But if we look here, here's where we start. The sources are the original 1817 Constitution, these clauses, the 1832 Constitution and these clauses, the 1869 Constitution and this single clause. All right. So, but first we got to find out, what does the U.S. Constitution say about the states? So we will go up here and we will this is the U.S. Constitution. And we need to go to Article 4, Section 3. Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution says new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the jurisdiction of two or more states, by the junction, of two or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as of the Congress. The Congress shall have power to dispose and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. Number 4, the United States when it comes to its relation to the states is the United States shall guarantee to every state in the union, in this union, a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or of the executive, when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. And we saw this come out into actual being in 2020, when we were having crazy riots all over the country, and the president at the time, Donald Trump, offered to mobilize the National Guard to come in and help stop the riots. But he didn't go there without the permission of the legislature or the governor. And so both denied, all the different states that were having those problems denied the federal help. And the government honored it. They didn't overstep their constitutional bounds, which is a crazy thing these days, that somebody would actually honor their jurisdiction within the government. So that's an example of that. But the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory. Okay, so what they did in 1787, this was originally written by a guy named Thomas Jefferson. You might have heard of Thomas Jefferson. He wrote another document called the Declaration of Independence. Now, mind you, all of these things were the group effort of a lot of people. The Declaration of Independence was Thomas Jefferson and 4 others. They were a committee of 5. They just asked Jefferson to draft it. Then they amended it in the committee together. Then they sent it to the House of the Whole, and then they amended it some more, much to Jefferson's chagrin. But anyway, in 1787, the Continental Congress and Convention assembled. They adopted this unanimously for the territories, and this was while they were doing the Continental Convention was drafting the Constitution. The Continental Congress adopted this, and this was called the Great Christian Document. That was its title, the Great Christian Document. Think about that one while we go through it. Now, all of this here that we're just scrolling through, this is all logistics about what the territory needs to do to get its act together, with a provisional Congress and sheriffs and courts and governor and these different things. They basically had to be successful with their territorial government and then petition to submit a constitution. And then they had to be given permission to do that. And then the Constitution had to be ratified, and then that state could become a thing. A state in that territory could become a state in the Union. But it says right here in section 13, this is the reason for the states and for extending the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, which form the basis whereon these republics, not democracies. You never see the word democracy in any government document, going all the way back to the 1620s. It's always a republic. For extending the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, which form the basis whereon these republics, their laws and constitutions are erected. excuse me, to fix and establish those principles as the basis of all laws, constitutions, and governments, which forever hereafter shall be formed in the said territory, to provide also for the establishment of states and permanent government therein, and for the admission to a share in the federal councils on an equal footing with the original states at as early periods as may be consistent with the general interest. The general interest is the good of the whole, meaning all the individual states have to vote on it to allow a new state to come in. But the purpose of adding more states, more republics to the original 13 republics was for extending the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, which form the basis of the republics, the laws, and the constitutions. So civil and religious liberty combined are the basis for all government and society in the republics. So if you think about it, the laws of nature, one of the parts of that is it's my house, my rules. If you want to join the exclusive club of the original 13 states that fought the revolution, that built the colonies from scratch without any help, that built their own state governments or colonial governments by themselves without any help, fought a revolution, made the Declaration of Independence, signed the Declaration of Independence, signed the Constitution, and said they have the exclusive and sole right to make the rules to join the club. Is that making sense to you? Because they knew what they were fighting for. They knew what it cost them to build it, and they wanted it to remain perpetual and last. Look at the seal with the pyramid. They want it to last longer than the seal. Okay. So if you don't understand this, go back and look at the video in our files on the Great Seal, and you'll see. All right. So if you want to join the Union, you've got to extend the same principles as the country was founded. That's why every elected official or somebody, a government official that is appointed, but they receive taxpayer dollars, they have to swear an oath to defend, to support and or defend the Constitution of their state and the federal Constitution, so that everything remains the same as the precedent at the beginning. I can't stress this enough. This is one of the most important lectures that you're going to listen, that you're going to hear in the whole thing. All right. So section 14. It is hereby ordained and declared by the authority aforesaid that the following articles shall be considered as articles of compact between the original states and the people and the states in the said territory, and forever remain unalterable unless by common consent. Okay, here's what I just said. This is a compact between the original states and the people of those states to admit or deny admittal to other groups of people that want to form a state and become part of that union. All right. We've lost sight of that. This is precedent, but see, nobody's ever heard of this document. I haven't met hardly any elected official that knows it even exists. Some of the greatest people that claim to be the conservative leaders of the nation can't tell you what this document is, but it's one of the 4 organic documents of America, and I'll do a video on that one of these days. So this is the compact between the people in the states, the original states, to admit other groups of people that want to form states and be part of the club. This is what you have to do. Article 1, this is what you got to do to extend the fundamental principles of civil and religious liberty, which is the basis of everything. First, no person demeaning himself in a peaceable and orderly manner shall ever be molested on account of his mode of worship or religious sentiments in the territory. The very first thing is religious liberty. But as we saw in there, you can't use religious liberty to think that you can act in any damn fool way you want. Because here it says demeaning himself in a peaceable and orderly manner. That's why you have laws against disturbing the peace and law and order. They depend on the individual people being able to govern himself. Number 2, the inhabitants of the said territory, and then blah, blah. They're pretty much talking about all the laws that are delegated in Section 8 of Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Article 3, religion, morality, and knowledge. Okay? Religion first, morality second, knowledge. Being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. I want you to read that once again. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And we saw up here that these requirements to become a state are unalterable unless by common consent. This has never been altered. This document has been compromised when it comes to the slavery issue. That's where you get the Mason-Dixon line in the Missouri Compromise, because this document outlaws slavery. But that's not the footnotes that we're chasing here. So with that in mind, let's go look at the Mississippi Constitution of 1817. This is a big preamble. Goes through all the delineations of the boundaries of the state. And then it starts here: an act to enable the people of the western part of the Mississippi Territory to form a constitution and state government, and for the admission of such state into the Union on an equal footing with the original states, in order to secure to the citizens thereof the rights of life, liberty, and property. Do ordain and establish the following constitution and form of government, and do mutually agree with each other to form ourselves into a free and independent state by the name of the state of Mississippi. These original people say that we have formed a constitution for the admission of such a state into the Union on an equal footing with the original states. Remember what the criteria for the Northwest Ordinance was. So that's what they're declaring. So, Declaration of Rights, Bill of Rights. I'm going to show you something at the end of the Bill of Rights that will really put things together for you in a lot of ways. But anyway, in order to be on an equal footing with the original states, number one, this is the preamble to the Bill of Rights, that the general, great, and essential principles of liberty and free government may be recognized and established. Okay? So the purpose of a Bill of Rights is so that the great and essential principles of liberty. I don't know what just happened here, but let's go back and find where we're supposed to be. There we go. Technical difficulties. Sorry about that. Have no clue what happened, but here we are back. So when we get down here to Articles 3 and 4, we will see that this was what was footnoted, that we started with the current Constitution of the state of Mississippi. Where was the precedent for this clause? Where did it come from? And it says here, the exercise and enjoyment of religious profession and worship without discrimination shall forever be free to all persons in this state, provided that the right hereby declared and established shall not be so construed as to excuse acts of licentiousness or justify practices inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state. Licentiousness is lawless behavior, behaving like there is no law that can contain you from doing what you foolhardily want to do. You can't have a society that functions that way. And then number 4 is no preference shall ever be given by law to any religious sect or mode of worship. So this is the precedent for what we just read in that one clause. So you see that they pretty much combine these two into one. And there again, no preference shall ever be given by law to any religious sect or mode of worship. That is a certain denomination of Christianity, or to the Jews, or to the Muslims, or the Buddhists, or whatever that want to come here, as long as they can mind their own business without licentious and immoral activities. No preference shall ever be given by law or mode of worship, or how you go about your rituals and ceremonies for that denomination. The government is off limits. So you have to understand the Reformation and what led up to it and what proceeded from it to understand all of that. And we're not going to go there. It used to burn people at stake just for reading a Bible. But when you get down here to the end of this, the end of the Bill of Rights has a conclusion paragraph or little sentence. It says, to guard against transgressions of the higher powers herein delegated. So these 29 things in the Bill of Rights for the original state of Mississippi are there to guard against transgression of the government, the higher powers herein delegated. Okay, because after that, it starts with distribution of powers. We declare that everything in this article is accepted out of the general powers of government and shall forever remain inviolate, and that all laws contrary thereto or to the following provisions shall be void. So if anybody makes it, well, number one, the government can't go here. This is accepted out of the general powers of government. The government cannot go inside the Bill of Rights and do anything with it. The right of trial by jury shall remain inviolate. You cannot violate this command of the people. These are the things that the people reserve to themselves. The government can't touch it. That's why it's in the Bill of Rights. But it's also vital for preserving the fundamental liberties. All right. So let's go to the next one. So we are going to the 1832 Mississippi Constitution. And we see here, this one doesn't even have a preamble at all. It starts directly with the Declaration of Rights, that the general, great, and essential principles of liberty and free government may be recognized and established, we declare. And then it goes through, all political powers inherent in the people. All free governments are founded on their authority and for their benefit. So we see all these things. Then you get to section 3, and it says, well, let's just go back to number 2. You'll see this in the Declaration of Independence. All political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and are entitled to and established for their benefit, the benefit of the people, not the politicians. And therefore, they have at all times an unalienable and indefeasible right to alter or abolish their form of government in such manner as they may think expedient. Now, section 3. The exercise and enjoyment of religious profession and worship without discrimination shall forever be to all free persons in this state, provided that the right hereby declared and established shall not be so construed as to excuse acts of licentiousness or justify practices inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state. No preference shall be given by law to any religious sect or mode of worship. Then we go down here to the conclusion. But I want to go down here to something that's called the general provisions. It says here, here's the oath of office that we saw earlier. In section 5, it says, no person who denies the being of a God, or a future state of rewards and punishment shall hold any office in this state. We saw that before. But look at section 14 down here. This is in the general powers of government. Okay? This is part of the general rule. Remember, the Bill of Rights is to accept things out of the general powers. Okay? So if it's in the general powers, then this is something that the legislature can act on, can make laws and regulations and different things like that. Okay? If it's in the Bill of Rights, they can't. But part of the general powers of the state is religion, morality, and knowledge, being necessary to good government, the preservation of liberty, and the happiness of mankind. Schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged in this state. Let's go back over here real quick to the 1817 one, and we'll go to the general powers. General provisions. And we see here in section 16 that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government, the preservation of liberty, and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged in this state. This is a direct quote from the what? From the laws for statehood in the Northwest Ordinance. So, in order to preserve the general principles of civil and religious liberty that were the basis and establishment of the original constitutions and the precedents of this country, part of the way to preserve that is that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government. Today, there's nobody in the country that says we have good government. And you have to ask the question, why? What is the precedent to show us why our government is not good? This is it. There's no other clause that specifically states this is what you have to do for good government. Let me read it to you again. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government, the preservation of liberty, and the happiness of mankind. Your schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged in this state. So what is the Common Core curriculum to preserve the Union? Religion, morality, and knowledge. In that order. Religion, morality, and knowledge are necessary for good government, the preservation of liberty, and the happiness of mankind. So let's continue on. There's another one here in the mix. Okay, so this is the 1868 or 1869. It was ratified in 1869. This is after the Civil War. They had to amend their constitution and restart things after the Civil War. And most of the southern states had to do that because their whole society was collapsed by the war and they had to start over. So the 1860, after the Civil War, they amended their constitution. To the end that justice be established, public order maintained, and liberty perpetuated, we the people of the state of Mississippi, look at this, grateful to Almighty God for the free exercise of the right to choose their own government, their own form of government, do ordain this Constitution. So we see, now we're seeing the current preamble starting to develop. Public order maintained. That was a big deal in the 1860s. This 5 years after the end of the Civil War. And here's a little side note. It was the black state representatives that were primarily Republicans that wrote this document. All persons resident in the state, citizens of the United States, are hereby declared citizens of the state of Mississippi. No person, including the slaves that have recently been free, shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property except by due process of law. They are having a lot of lynchings back then. But what they did in this Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, was they combined the other two that we were looking at and put it in one. And it's here in section 23. So you will see here how the things have changed through common consent in the proper way by the conventions of the people, not by a single person or a single judge or a court of law, but by conventions of the people themselves. They always have the right to abolish and reestablish their government the way they see fit for the betterment and enjoyment of their society. So, and this was all ratified by the Congress, by the courts, and by the President of the United States. Or it can't become a state of the union. I keep saying that over and over again. You got to understand this. This is constitutional law that is consistent with the purposes of the President of the United States of America. No religious test as qualification for office shall ever be required, and no preference shall ever be given by law to any religious sect or mode of worship. But the free enjoyment of all religious sentiments and the different modes of worship shall ever be held sacred, provided the rights hereby secured shall not be construed to what? Justify acts of licentiousness, injurious to morals, or dangerous to the peace and safety of the state. Now, this is, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. This is all their requirements and what they're supposed to do. The franchise, who can vote, school funds, education and science, how to fund the schools. This is all about the mechanics of the school system, not the religion, morality, and knowledge. Militia. Every male citizen is supposed to be armed and trained in the art of war. We're not going there. Okay. So, but it doesn't say anything here about the religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for good government and the happiness of mankind. I thought that was kind of interesting when I first saw that, but it doesn't mean that that was not the established Common Core curriculum that was necessary for good government and happiness of mankind. So now let's go back here to the current Constitution of the state of Mississippi. And we see no religious test as a qualification for office shall be required, and no preference shall be given by law to any religious sect or mode of worship, but the free enjoyment of all religious sentiments and the different modes of worship shall be held sacred. The rights hereby secured shall not be construed to justify acts of licentiousness, injurious to morals, or dangerous to the peace and safety of the state, or to exclude the Holy Bible from use in any public school in this state. Is this consistent with how they're supposed to teach religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for good government and the happiness of mankind? It is. Because that's the book that they used over all other books, was the Holy Bible. So why did they take it out of the general provisions of the Constitution, put it in the Bill of Rights? Well, the answer to that is you go back to the first two constitutions, and the summation of the purpose of a Bill of Rights was to, well, let's just go read it for ourselves. Let's not make it up. They took it out of the general provisions and they put it in the Bill of Rights for a reason. And it's a very important reason. And you'll see here. It's to guard against transgressions of the high powers herein delegated. We declare that everything in this article is accepted out of the general powers of government. So where did we see the religion, morality, and knowledge clause in the constitutions? It was in the general powers. All right. So they took it out of the general powers of their Mississippi's Constitution when they rewrote it in 1869 after the Civil War, to accept it out of the general powers of government and shall forever remain inviolate. That any laws contrary thereto or to the following provisions shall be void. So with that in mind, the people of Mississippi were very smart. They knew what was going on in America at that time after the Civil War. French philosophy came pouring into academia, starting at Harvard University with Charles William Eliot. And it had started before the Civil War, but it really came into play after the Civil War, especially with the rebuilding and what to do with how to educate the slaves. So all these people were coming up with all these new ideas, but they were looking to Europe for their ideas instead of America. Charles William Eliot became president of Harvard University in 1869 as well, in the beginning of 1869. And he said in his inaugural address, we're going to no longer look to America for our ideas. We are going to become progressive and we're going to look to Europe for our ideas. Mississippi said, hell no, you're not. You're not going to exclude the Holy Bible from any public school in this state, to protect it from the government, because the government was starting to intrude on the principles of religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for good government and the happiness of mankind. So this is in the Bill of Rights. This is in the current Bill of Rights. And it's also constitutional because it's required for statehood by Article 4, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution via the Northwest Ordinance. Religion, morality, and knowledge are necessary for good government and happiness of mankind. Schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged, and everything in the Bill of Rights is accepted from the general powers of government and is to remain inviolable. You can't violate this, can't go here. And you can't exclude the Holy Bible from use in any public school in this state. And every politician that asked me to help them, asked me to campaign for them, or asked me for political advice, first thing I do is I show them this in the state of Mississippi and say, once you put your hand on a Holy Bible and swear so help me God to defend the Constitution, are you going to honor this? Because if you're not going to honor this, I'm going to make damn sure you don't get elected. And they look at me like I've never seen that before. So my question is still, will you implement this once you get elected? And I can't tell you how many people, yeah, boy, I'll do that. We got to do that. That's great. So then when it comes time and they get elected, and before they take an oath, I go back to them. I said, are you going to honor your oath? And they'll say, well, you don't understand. Well, I'm here to tell you folks, I do understand. I just showed you the exact constitutional requirements for education, the source of this clause, the precedent for this clause, where it got to, where it came from, how it evolved, how it's written, and it's still there. And I will remind you that you are under oath if you're an elected official to uphold and defend this. So help you God. Under penalty of perjury, if I mind you. So anyway, think seriously about this. Go back and consider this, because this is the most important thing, because there was very few things that were required to become a state in the Union. You had to have a Republican form of government. You had to preserve the principles of civil and religious liberty, and you had to use the Bible to do it, because that's how the founding fathers were educated. Follow me? There's no other way to fix America. People say it. I heard one guy say, anybody that comes up and says they have the answer to fixing all our problems is a fool. Well, I may be a fool. I'm not arguing or debating that. But this is the only way to do it, because this is the constitutional remedy. It's education. We've been educated out of American civics. This is American civics. This is how it must be. And the main textbook in the public schools has got to go back to this one, or we'll never have civil and religious liberty ever again. Amen. God bless. You're the best. There's a lot to chew on here, folks, but you need to go back and you need to memorize this one, because this is the most important one that you'll ever see.